So let's talk about black and white photography, but more importantly, how to make better black and white photographs through the use of your colors. Yes, your colors are actually the most important value that you have in creating the tones that you want in your black and white images. Hey everybody, Blake Rudis here with F64Academy.com, where we learn to master Photoshop to make better photographs. F64 Academy is Photoshop for photographers, and today we're going to be talking about black and white photography. So what I'm going to show you today is just a little bit of history as to what black and white method is best for black and white processing. I'm going to show you why color is so important for making your black and white images, and then I'm going to wrap it all up and show you my 4-step process. It's a very simple 4-step process for making phenomenal black and white images. And I have an action for you, but wait, please wait until this video is over before you just go and download the actions. I always say that, and still someone says, I just downloaded the action, I don't know what to do with it. That's because you probably need to watch this first. Now, last year I did this video called Stop Making Photographs. And what I was trying to share with you there is how to build experiences. And I'll go ahead and share this in the description below. There'll be a link to that video. I'll also post it at the end of this video. And in that video, I made a very bold statement. First and foremost, the thing that you have to understand here is color. Color is the most important element that you're going to find in your images. I would argue with anybody all day long that composition is not nearly as important as color. Now, I still back that statement 100%. I didn't get any arguments, which is great. I did get some people that were suggesting that, well, you're saying that color is better than composition, but what about a black and white photograph? Well, the thing about black and white photographs is that they're made best through the use of your colors. Yes, through the use of your colors, your black and white images can be better. All too often, I find that there's drab, dull, boring black and white images that are just gray on gray on gray on gray on gray. And that's a problem, because what that tells me is that someone just took their image and said, this would be great as a black and white photograph, and they pull it into Photoshop, they do their black and white processing, and blah. There's no black, there's no white, it's just gray. All black and white processing is not created equal, and all black and white plugins, programs, or techniques are not the same. They all will do something different to the colors in your image to create the tones and the values that you're going to receive in your black and white photograph to begin with. So what I have here is a great example because it's got quite a bit of color in it. The greens, the blues, skin tones, the lips. I mean, there's a lot of different color that's happening in this image that's great for a black and white process. And I want you to ask yourself, how would you process this in black and white? Just think to yourself, what's the method that you would use? Okay, just stop here, think about that for a second. So now I'm going to break down these methods and give you 3 methods that are common for making a black and white image, and then I'll show you how my method differs. Okay, so looking at this, let's take a look at this image with some color wheels on it, because that will help us. The top color wheel is going to be what I call the digital color wheel, because the complementary colors are going to be cyan and red, yellow and blue, and your magenta and green. The bottom is going to be your painter's color wheel, where red and green are the complements, blue and orange are the complements, and yellow and purple are the complements. There are 2 different color wheels that kind of come to the same different end, but it will show us the data and the values that we're going to receive when we turn this image into a black and white photograph. Now, initially, the first way that I ever learned to make a black and white photograph, and it's the worst way, it's very, very destructive. It even gets rid of your color information when you do it, is to actually make a grayscale image. Now, to make a grayscale image, you would go to Image, you'd go to Mode, and then hit Grayscale right here. And that will actually take your image and make it grayscale. And when you select it, it's even going to say, hey, we're going to toss out your color information. Is that okay? And if you say yes, all your color is gone. And what you get is actually not that bad of a black and white conversion, but you don't have any colors to work with after that. Everything in your image, when you're in the image mode of grayscale, all your colors, all your color palettes, everything will be in the form of grayscale, which might be fine if someone's doing, like, I don't know, a drawing or something like that, wants it to look like graphite, but it's not fine when we're doing our black and white processing. So I'm going to shy away from that black and white adjustment. The next one that I've seen people do is to go into the HSL, or hue saturation adjustment layer, and drop the saturation down. Now, what I want you to pay attention to here is not necessarily in the painter's color wheel at the bottom or in the photograph on the right. It's actually in the digital color wheel that we have on the left. Notice how when you say desaturate by taking all the saturation out of the colors, you're saying, oh, it's making a black and white image, Blake. Yes, but it's taking all of your most potent forms of your primary colors and it's turning them gray. It's basically saying, hey, take the highest potency or the highest saturation of red, cyan, green, blue, whatever color, and just knock it down to nothing, to 50% gray. So this isn't actually the best way to make a black and white image because we're taking the highest potential of our color and we're telling it to be 50% gray. Let's not do it. So the other way is actually to use the black and white adjustment layer that some people like to use here. If we go into our adjustment layers, we go to black and white. And actually, this does a pretty good job of making a decent black and white image right off the bat. We'll go and delete that HSL adjustment layer there. This is a pretty good job of making a decent black and white image, because as you can see here, we have some separation of the tonal values of the colors here, which is exactly what we want. We want to attribute the right colors to the right tones when we're making our black and white images. So this works out pretty well. The only problem that I see with this black and white adjustment is if you look right here on the top here, this gives you the opportunity to make your reds a little bit darker or a little bit brighter, sure, but it's only giving you the luminance value of those individual colors, meaning the value or the amount of white or black that is present within the color to create the tone that it's creating, which might sound great because you get this slider to do it, but it's not the best option because it doesn't give you access to many more things like your saturation and your hue and other very valuable attributes for your colors in your image. So I'm going to delete that. And what I've done here is I've kind of made this like a cooking show. So here's our grayscale image here. We'll just put this one at the bottom because that is going to be our first one. Then we have our HSL adjustment, which it's not that great because again, we're just stripping all the color out of our color and making it gray. Then we have our black and white adjustment, which isn't too bad. It actually makes a pretty good black and white image. But here's what happens when you really know and understand the colors in your image and you make a black and white image that's more compelling based off of the colors that are in your photograph. And if you notice what's happening to the color wheel in all three of these, the color wheels, look at the color wheels as we go through here. They all change, but look at my method. It's very deliberate about what colors I want actually to be the most prominent and dominant and what colors I want to push back. And that's where you get some really awesome values for the colors in your image that create the tones that you want in a good black and white photograph. Now, the beauty of this is that here is an image that we have from Adobe stock. Here's the exact same model with slightly different attire on. But here's the cool part about this is that once you get this set up for one individual scene, you can use this black and white process that I have here on any image that would be in that same batch or same series. Just look at how they are unified with this exact same black and white process for both of them. Now I will go over how I created this in a minute here, but I want to share with you just how important it is to have good quality color underneath this black and white process. My black and white process includes a gradient map that goes above the image, and then I do all my color work underneath. So if we were to just put a gradient map on this photograph that has no color work done to it, and I say to myself, oh wow, this would be a great black and white photograph, and I put this on here, it's like, it's not that great. But watch what happens because of the color work that I've done underneath and how that responds and reacts to how those colors will turn when it comes to the black and white process that I'm going to show you. So if we look at the color work here, here's the before, here's the after. The color work looks really great. Here's the gradient map on top. Now, here's my process. This is my personal flair on black and white processing. I don't go into an image and I say to myself, this would be a great black and white photograph. Let me make it black and white. Some people do. I do not. For me, I personally feel that black and white is a finishing effect. It's something that should be done at the end of the workflow to ensure that your tones and your colors are beautiful before going into the black and white process. So what I'm showing you here, you may need to change your idea and your mindset about where in your workflow black and white needs to take place. Me personally, it's at the end, always at the end, because I can use all that beautiful data that I created underneath to create the most spectacular black and white photograph I can. Now I'm going to go over to this image here. And in this image, I'll share with you what that process is. So ideally, the way you want to start this out is by adding a gradient map to the image. Now you're going to watch this image just completely transform when we go through this process. And it has to do with how we control our colors, how we shift our colors, how we refine our colors, and then balance our colors underneath a tonal adjustment. So let's say that this image is done. I like the way the tones and the colors look. I'd be happy to, let's say, share this, okay? We're just gonna, for all intents and purposes. Why I'm telling you that is because this should happen at the end of your workflow. So we're assuming that this is the end of our image. So I'm gonna go to the gradient map here. Now the gradient map is gonna be based off of whatever colors you have in your color palette. So if you have, let's say, red over here, and then let's do some off the wall color. Let's just do its complement, like cyan, okay? So if you have red and cyan that are in your foreground and background palette here, if we were to make a gradient map, you're going to see that this is going to go to a, gosh, that's horrible, red to cyan gradient map. And what's happening here, just to kind of give you an idea of what's happening here, your reds are being attributed to your darkest values in the image, and your blues or cyans here are being attributed to anything that's in the lightest values of your image. Not that great for this kind of color work. I definitely use it for color grading, but that's not what we're talking about today. So how we would use this in a black and white workflow is I would make sure that this is set to black and white. So what I could do here is just click on that gradient map. I'm going to save your life here, and I'm just going to change this to this black to white gradient. Either of these black to white gradients will work. Okay, wow, my eyes can reset, so can yours. Sorry about that. Maybe should have chose some less violent colors. But what we have here now is our darkest colors are now being told to be black as they transition into the lightest colors that are now being told to be white. So this is the baseline that I start for my black and white process. Now, one thing I do want to show you here though, is that this is going from pure black to pure white. So it could make some clipping happen in your image, meaning your darkest dark areas become too dark and your lightest light areas become too light. So how we would fix that is just click on this gradient map, and then down here on your black, we're going to double click this, and we're going to call this, see where it says RGB is 000, 000 is black. So let's go 5, 5, 5. So what we're saying here is that the darkest dark areas in the image can't necessarily go to pure black. We're going to put a little governor in there that says you can't go to pure black. We'll press OK. Then I'm going to double click on this white side, and you see what this is, 255, 255, 255? That's white. So let's make this 250, 250, 250. Now you can make this 245 to whatever you wanted to make that to help that area from getting too dark. But here's what I would recommend on that, is that I wouldn't go below, let's say 10. So I wouldn't go to 15 or 20, because every zone from 0 to 10, so if zone 0 is black, is only 22 pixels of value. So what that means is that I wouldn't take this black area over here to something like 22, because nothing would ever get pure black. Everything would stay within zone 1. So that's why I want this to be somewhere between 5 and let's say 12, okay? But that will protect your areas from getting too black or too white. So now what we need to do is we need to ensure that we shift our colors underneath. So what we can do is actually add an HSL adjustment layer. And anybody who's been following me for any given amount of time has seen me do this. And I'm going to create an action for you here that all you got to do is press play and it'll set you up. But I want you to understand what's going on here. With this HSL adjustment layer underneath the gradient map, we now get 3 values for our color. We get hue, saturation, and lightness. Okay. We don't just get the lightness. If we were to just come down here and make this the black and white adjustment, all we're getting here is lightness. We are not getting hue. We are not getting saturation. It is just the lightness or the presence of black or white within a given color. So this is what I'm going to do. Turn these back on. The beauty of this, what's really great about this, is that you can actually use the targeted adjustment tool here, click on that, and then click on whatever color in the image you want to adjust. You're thinking, well, Blake, I don't see any color here. That's fine. Photoshop knows there's color here. Photoshop's smart, a lot smarter than me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right here. You see, it's going to say yellows, but if I click on this area, it's going to be reds. And if I click over here, we got cyans. So it knows actually underneath this gradient map what colors are there, which is really great because now I'm on my reds, or let's say reds right here. Okay. I'm going to increase the saturation of the color red. And what you're going to see is that we can start to shape the tonal value and the presence of the tones in our image through the colors that are there. So that age-old question of, well, Blake, you said that color is more important than composition. Well, what about black and white? Now you're seeing it here. The reason why color is so important for black and white images is because color creates your black and white image if you do it this way. Okay, so now we can go into the lightness of the color red. So now I can make reds a little bit deeper, a little bit darker. What I'm trying to do with my vision for this is really focus on this yellow beam of light that's coming down through here. So that's what I'm going to aim my primary focus at. So now I'll click on this color and I want that yellow to be brighter. Watch what happens as I make those yellows more saturated. Initially they get more bright, right? So I can make the lightness of them even brighter as well. So we focus our attention on that area. Now, let's say I wanted to go into some of these individual panes up here of the stained glass. Here's where I would start to manipulate the stained glass a little bit, maybe make that stained glass a little bit darker here so that our attention doesn't go necessarily to the stained glass, but stays primarily on that yellow that we have there. This is what I call shifting the colors. This is the first step, shifting the colors. So we shift the colors, we're moving them around. If we were to actually take our gradient map and turn it off, it's like, whoa, Blake, turn that gradient map back on. That's almost as bad as the first gradient map you showed us. The colors underneath aren't supposed to look that great because what are we doing this for? We're doing this as an artistic effect that happens after our processing is done. And the great thing about this is that once you're done with this, you can put these into a folder and then turn it on and off. And then that folder, which is going to be in the action, will just dictate what the black and white is going to look like, regardless of the color that you chose. So this is, we'll just call this shift colors. Okay. After that, I want to go ahead and refine the colors. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into the selective color adjustment layer. Now the selective color adjustment layer, I've done many tutorials on this before. It basically adds a percentage or reduces a percentage of a color within a color. Kind of confusing, but we'll think about it this way when we talk about refinement. Let's go into the yellows. Okay. And this is happening with the cyan that is present within the color yellow. So now I can get very nitpicky. I'm not just moving and shifting the hue and the saturation of the color. I'm refining the blend of the way this color is working. So as I add more yellow to that, it's going to get brighter. If I add more magenta to that, it's going to make the magenta and the yellow more present, which is going to make this a little bit darker. And then if I move this over in the cyans, I can make this a little bit more refined there and make it a little bit brighter. I'm kind of tightening down the tones within those yellows. Now let's go into the color red and see what happens when we shift the color red around. So with red, if I make it more red, it's going to get darker. I can also add a deeper presence of black to the color red by moving it this way. You see that? So now our reds are really tightening down and our yellows are starting to open up a lot more here. Going to the yellow of the color red, maybe boost those a little bit to brighten them up so the red doesn't get so dark that we can't necessarily see the detail that's within there. So that's the refinement stage, taking those colors and shifting the colors that are within the color to refine the color and make it the way I want it to be in the given tone. Again, if I turn my gradient map off, this is gonna be hideous. It's supposed to be, because we're really pushing our colors into places where they shouldn't go to get the tones that we couldn't get. Now what I'm gonna do here, let's call this to refinement. If I could spell correctly, let's take that R off the end. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the color balance adjustment layer. And this is where we're going to balance those colors. So what you'll notice is that I'm going to delete this, call this 3, and then call this balance. Okay. So what you'll notice with this is that after we have shifted our colors, then we've refined our colors, we now come down to the color balance and we can force those colors in various different directions. So looking at our midtones here, if I force this more towards the reds, because we initially made our reds darker at that shift and refinement phase, when we move the balance more towards the red, it's going to make the image darker. If we move the balance more towards the yellow, it's going to make the image brighter. So look at the amount of control that you have here when you shift your colors, refine those colors, and then balance them in the direction that you want. Look at the tonal values that you have here. Unprecedented black and white images received from color and color alone. The only thing that's happening with this gradient map up here is it's saying, hey, anything that changes underneath me, just change accordingly to this map that we have here. That's what a gradient map does. It maps out the colors and gives it, in this case, the tones that we want on top of there. So if we go into the balance here, again, that was in the midtones. Go into the color balance and the shadows. Look at how deep we can make those reds and those shadows, but then we can boost up maybe some of the yellow, the presence of the yellow in those shadows, and see if we can add some more contrast there. That's a little bit too much, I think. And let's see what happens when we move the magenta and the green. I'll admit that sometimes when I'm doing this, I'm actually seeing how far I can take a given slider to see what kind of results I'm going to get. And I think I like that when we move that more towards the green. It's a nice shift there. Okay, now let's go into the highlights. So going into the highlights, let's boost up the presence of yellow within those highlights. Let's turn this gradient map off now just for grins. Oh my gosh, that's hideous. That's hideous. But it's predominantly what? Yellow and red. So as we are shifting the balance of the yellow and the red there, that gradient map is acting accordingly and giving us the beautiful tones that we would want initially. Now, if I turn this off, all these off, look at that. Muddy, blah, gray on gray on gray. Now we're getting that presence of black to white. So at this point, I'm not done. What I would do here is go into the gradient map. And at the gradient map level now, this is where I get to dictate a couple more things about how the tones are going to react in this image. So this is the way the gradient map is set up. We're saying transition from black into white, okay? What we can do here is we can actually grab this little point here. Make sure you grab this little point here, because if you accidentally click outside of this little diamond, it's going to add another point to your gradient. It's really a kind of a pain in the butt. I really wish they would have made this much bigger for me to grab onto. But when I click here, this is how you can make an image more high key or more low key. If I want it to be more low key, I'll move it over to the right. And as I move it over to the right, you're going to see it's going to get much darker there. The presence of the image is much darker, heavier, more favored on the black. Why? Because what we're telling this image now is that we want the presence of black to be much stronger in through the midtones into our middle white areas. But if we want this to be more high key, we move it this way. And as we move it this way, the image is gonna brighten up quite a bit more because we're telling the image to have a much higher potency of the white tonal value in there. Now, another heavy hitter in here is actually gonna be this smoothness slider. This smoothness slider, when you open this up, is actually gonna dictate how much presence of contrast we get. If it's as high as it can go, it's gonna be a very deep contrast between the darks over here to the lights over here. So we can adjust the smoothness a little bit as we adjust this over here and start really shaping and refining the tonal value in our image from the black and white at the very end. But this would be our before. If we just did this as our gradient map here, it's atrocious. It doesn't look good. We need that color to create phenomenal black and white images. Color still, to this day, in my opinion, hands down is more important than composition, even in black and white images, because it's the color that creates them. Now, I did tell you that I created an action for you, all right? So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna go ahead and delete all of this, or let me put it in a group and turn the eyeball off, okay? What I did was I created an action for you, and in this action, you're gonna see just the black and white layer. All that's gonna do is gonna give you that traditional black and white gradient map that I think is the best because of the way it maps out your tones. But if you click this one here, black and white with all color layers, it's actually gonna run this action that's gonna create all of those layers that I did for you there and give you some directions on how to use this so that you'll never forget how to make the best black and white image. We'll go ahead and press continue. And here we have all the steps already lined up, and it even starts you off right away with the HSL adjustment layer there so you can get at it. You're gonna see two links here at the end of this video. One is to download these actions, and the other one is to go watch that video on stop making photographs and build experiences. Just like you saw me here build an experience with black and white images, you too can do the same thing in your color work as well as your black and white images.